That was better than yesterday, wasn't it? Hello children, it's Grandma's story time again, and today we've got another guest. This guest is Paddington Bear. Isn't he nice? He's got a hat, comes off, goes on, everything. So he's going to sit here with Lamb Chop and Rabbit, and he's going to listen to a story. Sit still, Paddington. Right, you ready? He's going to listen to a story about himself, and it's called Paddington at the Launderette. Now, it's a very nice book. It's a little pop-up book, so I shall show you the pop-up pictures every time we get to them. Okay. So, are you sitting comfortably? Then now begin. Paddington at the Launderette. Paddington was in a mess, and for once it wasn't his fault. The day had started badly when both Mr. and Mrs. Brown woke feeling poorly and were told by their doctor they had a bug and were to stay in bed, which meant leaving him in charge. Paddington took his job very seriously, and after carefully making out a list of things to be done, he began by collecting all the dirty washing, ready for the laundryman when he came. Now, we don't have laundrymen here, we're not that posh, but obviously they did, and there he is coming down the stairs with the laundry. Unfortunately, he spent so much time writing out the list, he arrived at the front door just in time to see the laundry van disappearing down the road. And there he is, running after the laundry van. He tried running after it, waving his paws and calling out, but it was no use. The van was making far too much noise for the driver to hear. But the sight of a picture on the back of the van gave him an idea. It showed a large washing machine, and Paddington knew where there was one. Just like it, in fact, not one, but lots. They were in a place called a launderette. Now, when I was a student and I lived in London, I used to go to the launderette a lot because I didn't have a washing machine. But I think all of you at your houses have got washing machines, haven't you? Maybe you could help by getting your dirty washing and putting it in the washing basket instead of leaving it all over the floor. That would be a good thing to do. Once the idea had entered his mind, Paddington lost no more time. He piled the washing into Mrs. Brown's wheelbarrow and set off as fast as his legs would carry him. There he is, all with the washing in the wheelbarrow, and there's a policeman. Now, you know who used to be a policeman, don't you? Grandpa, he used to be a policeman, and I've still got his helmet on a shelf in the bedroom. I might put it on one day just to show you. Anyway, but the load was so wide and so high, it was harder than he bargained for. If it hadn't been for a friendly policeman, like Grandpa, holding up the traffic, there was no knowing where he would have ended up. As it was, by the time he reached the launderette, he was so out of breath, he hardly listened to the lady in charge. He hardly listened as the lady in charge handed him some washing powder. He couldn't remember whether she'd said he would need 4 machines with a cup of powder in each, or 4 cups of washing powder in one machine. In the end, he decided on 4 cups of washing powder in one machine sounded the best value, which seems to be the sensible thing. But it wasn't. It didn't take him long to discover his mistake. Before he had time to scramble clear, let alone call for help, soap bubbles began rising in a cloud from the top. Look at that, he's getting in a right old mess, isn't he? He tried pushing them back inside with his paw, but as fast as he did, 10 times as many billowed back out again. Soon the whole floor was awash. "Oh dear," groaned Paddington, "I'm in trouble again." Anxious to make amends, he picked up a mop and began clearing away the mess as quickly as he could before the storm broke. Wonder what storm that is. But to his surprise, the lady in charge seemed rather pleased. "Oh, it's time this place had a good spring clean," she said. "I've been so busy I haven't had a chance. So sometimes things that are a mess turn out to be something good, don't they?" So he made a mess on the floor and then he had to clean it up. Now, that happened one day at my house. Now, let me think, who was it? Silly Uncle David. He used to have a little job and he used to do the cleaning for me before I came home from work. And one day I came home and I went into the kitchen and my feet stuck to the floor every time I walked across it. Like that. And I thought, something wrong here. So I said to David, "David, did you spill something in the kitchen?" No, I just decided that I would clean the floor," he said. "That's very kind of you, but I think we need to do it again because there's sticky stuff all over it. What did you use?" "Oh, I just used the mop and I cleaned it all up nicely." "Okay." That was me walking across the floor. So I thought, well, I'll do it myself. So I got a mop and I cleaned all the floor and I lifted the bin. And when I lifted the bin, underneath, what do you think there was? A great big pile of sugar. So David had spilt something. He had spilt the sugar and he thought that he'd cleaned it all up, but there was some hiding under the bin. But what was good at the end of it was we all laughed and we had a clean floor. So that was good, wasn't it? Okay. He was a very good boy, really, David, and very kind, and he still is, but he's still a little bit silly, as you will well know. "So, it's time this place had a good spring clean," she said. "I've been so busy I haven't had a chance. If you'd like to do it for me, I'll look after your washing and make sure it's all done properly." And there's the lady, and there he is, cleaning the floor. She was as good as her word, for she did not only wash the washing, she ironed it too. Mr. and Mrs. Brown could hardly believe their eyes when they came downstairs. "I think," said Mrs. Brown, "that perhaps you should always do the laundry, Paddington." "Perhaps," said Paddington vaguely, putting on his perhaps not look. The truth of the matter was his paws were aching so much after all the spring cleaning he felt tired out. "I think," he announced, "I shall go to bed. I shall go to bed myself now. I think I may have a bug coming on too, a laundry bug." So there they are with all their laundry nice and clean. And that's the end of that story. But that wasn't a very long story, was it? So I think we can have another little one. And I've had this one sitting here. Oops, Paddington fell over. Oops. Sit up, Paddington. Right. I've had this one sitting here for a little while, just in case. And this is called Alfie Gets In First. And it's by a lady called Shirley Hughes. She writes some lovely books about children. So, Alfie Gets In First. Now, I hope you're not getting a bit bored and not wriggling about too much because, you know, you have to sit still for Grandma's story time. It's a time for when your mum or your dad can have a cup of tea or a nice drink and sit back and put their feet up while you sit and listen to me. So sit nicely and listen, and off we go. There we are. There's Alfie. What a nice little boy. One day, Alfie and Mum and Annie Rose was Alfie's sister. One day, Alfie and Mum and Annie Rose were coming home from the shops. Alfie ran on ahead because he wanted to get home first. He ran all the way from the corner to the front gate and up the steps to the front door. There they are, coming down the street. Then he sat down on the top step and waited for the others. We know a story about steps, don't we? A little poem. And it goes, "Halfway up the stairs is the stair where I sit. There isn't any other stair quite like it. It's not at the bottom, it's not at the top. So halfway up the stairs is the stair where I stop." That's nice, isn't it? We sing that quite a lot. Okay, so there's Alfie sitting at the top of the stairs. Then he sat down on the top step and waited for the others. Along came Mum, pushing Annie Rose and the shopping. "I've raced you," called Alfie. "I'm back first, so there." Annie Rose didn't care. She was tired. She sat back in her pushchair and sucked her thumb. Mum put the brake on the pushchair and left Annie Rose at the bottom of the steps while she lifted the basket of shopping up to the top. Then she found the key and opened the front door. Alfie dashed in ahead of her. I've won, he shouted. Mum put down the shopping in the hall and went back down the steps to lift Annie Rose out of her pushchair. But what do you think Alfie did then? Oh dear, there he is running inside. Shut the door. He gave the door a great big slam, bang, just like that. Then Mum was outside the door holding Annie Rose, and Alfie was inside with the shopping, and Mum's key was inside too. Oh dear. "Open the door, Alfie," said Mum, but Alfie didn't know how to open the door. Open the door from inside. The catch was too high. Mum looked in the letterbox. There she is, looking worried. "Try to reach the catch and turn it," she said. Alfie tried, but he couldn't quite reach it. "Can you put the key through the letterbox?" said Mum. But Alfie couldn't reach the letterbox either, so he must have been quite little. Annie Rose was hungry and as well as tired. She began to cry. Then Alfie began to cry too. He didn't like being all by himself on the wrong side of the door. Once when I was a little girl, I went shopping with my friend and her mum. And I got stuck somewhere and I cried too. We went to a big department store and there was a great big lift. And while her mum was getting some shopping, she said, "We'll go up to the next floor." So we all ran, me and my friend Anne and her little brother, and we ran inside the lift. And before we knew it, the lift doors started to close and the lift started to move. And her mum wasn't with us, so we screamed and cried, and it was horrible, and I didn't like it, and I was scared. And eventually, of course, the lift went up to the next floor, and the doors opened, and we went out, and a nice lady at the counter said, "What on earth's the matter?" And of course, by then, her mum had come upstairs, and it was all right, because what had happened was, if you don't press the open door button, then the doors automatically shut because somebody else is calling the lift from upstairs. So that was a bit scary for me, but I understand why it happened now. So if you're with your mum or somebody and you're going shopping and you're going in the lift, don't go in the lift by yourself because the doors might shut. So there, lesson learned, isn't it? Okay. And do you know what? I've been a bit scared of lifts ever since. So Alfie began to cry. He didn't like being all by himself on the wrong side of the door. Just then, Mrs. McNally came hurrying across the street to see what all the noise was about. There's Mrs. McNally. I bet she's Scottish, Mrs. McNally. I do think so. She and Mum took it in turns to say encouraging things into the letterbox, but Alfie still couldn't open the door. "Go and fetch your little chair from the sitting room, and then you'll be able to reach the couch," said Mum. But Alfie didn't try to fetch his little chair. He just went on crying, louder and louder, and Annie Rose cried louder and louder too. "There's my Maureen," said Mrs. McNally. "I'm sure she'll be able to help." There's her Maureen. Mrs. McNally's Maureen was a big girl. Right away she came and joined Mum and Annie Rose and Mrs. McNally on the top step. Might have to break a window," she said. "But I'll try to climb up the drain pipe first, if you like." But Mrs. McNally didn't like that idea at all. "Oh no, Maureen, you might hurt yourself," she said. Just then, Alfie's good friend the milkman came up the street in his milk float. When he saw Mum and Annie Rose and Mrs. McNally and Mrs. McNally's Maureen all standing on the top step, he stopped his float and said, "What's the trouble?" So they told him. "Don't worry, mate," the milkman shouted. "We'll soon have you out of there." There he is. But he's got a different accent as well. "Looks as though this lot's going to be a difficult break," said the milkman. But then Mrs. McNally's Maureen had a good idea. She ran to ask the window cleaner, who was working up the street, if he would bring his ladder and climb up to the bathroom window. And of course, when the window cleaner heard all about Alfie, he came hurrying along with his ladder as quickly as he could. Now, they were all on that side of the door. They couldn't see what Alfie was doing. And look at that. See? They didn't know. So then Mum and Annie Rose and Mrs. McNally and Mrs. McNally's Maureen and the milkman all stood on the top step and watched while the window cleaner put his ladder up against the house. He started to climb up to the bathroom window, but when he was halfway up the ladder, what do you think happened? The front door suddenly opened. There he is. It was Alfie. He had managed to reach the catch and turn it like that after all. He was very pleased with himself. He opened the front door as wide as it would go and stood back grandly to let everybody in. Then the window cleaner came down from his ladder, and he and the milkman and Mrs. McNally's Maureen and Mrs. McNally and Annie Rose and Mum and Alfie all went into the kitchen and had tea together. There we are, a nice little tea party. The end. There we are, waving at you. Okay, so that's the end of story time today. And you've had quite a long one now because I took too long reading that book. So let's say goodbye. Goodbye from Paddington. Oh, there we are. Goodbye from Rabbit. Bye. And goodbye from our lovely lamb chop. Bye bye, children. And we'll see you tomorrow. Hope you liked my outfit today. And put it all together. Did my hair special. Let's see what I do tomorrow. Bye.